Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At midnight, by a crackling fire in the Colorado wilds, two war vets toast old times, unaware that a war is brewing. When a ruthless HOA tries to claim a private lake that's been in one family for generations, one man stands his ground. What follows is a battle of borders, truth, and grit. I always say there's no better sound than a campfire crackling against the silence of Colorado Highland nights. That and the satisfying plunk of a baited hook dropping into still lake water. My ranch stretches across 320 acres of God's country, pines, ridgelines, and my private lake, tucked away in the southeastern basin of the property. I've fished that lake since I was a boy. My granddad dug the first pier by hand in the 40s. Now it's got a solid dock, a gravel trail, a covered fire ring, and motion-activated cameras watching every inch. I call it my therapy zone. That particular evening, I rolled up in my old F-350 with my buddy Brendan riding shotgun. We served together in Iraq, and while I got out early to take care of the family land, he stayed in longer. Now he works as a ranger in Wyoming, but once a year we meet up, drink bad coffee, and act like kids again under the stars. We set up camp just before dusk, pitched a canvas tent, fired up the portable grill, and threw a couple of trout lines off the pier. The smoke curled lazily into the pine tops, and the temperature dipped just enough to remind you summer was hanging by its last thread. We weren't exactly quiet. Two middle-aged guys with whiskey and old war stories don't whisper, but we weren't bothering anyone. The closest house was a good half-mile upslope across the ravine, where that new HOA neighborhood, Summit Shore Preserve, had mushroomed up 3 years ago. Fancy glass mansions with solar roofs, outdoor yoga decks, and people who thought rural meant weekend wine tasting with a lake view. I'd met a few of them in passing, mostly fine except for their president, Karen Reed. She had that permagrin of someone who says namaste right before suing you over a mailbox color. Around midnight, Brendan was poking the fire and trying to convince me aliens lived under the Rockies when I noticed the security feed buzz on my phone. Infrared motion. I tapped the screen, expecting maybe a curious coyote. Instead, I see three figures sneaking along the lower brush line just past the no trespassing sign. One woman, blonde, bob haircut, clipboard in hand. Two others, both in those stupid matching HOA windbreakers like they were on some sort of suburban recon mission. Uh-oh, I said, turning the phone to Brendan. Who the hell does a clipboard patrol at midnight? They were taking pictures of us, the fire, the pier, even the damn truck license plate. Then they scurried back the way they came, disappearing through the thicket toward the HOA's boundary. We didn't chase. We didn't yell. I just made sure the footage was backed up, cracked another beer, and muttered something about HOA Karens not surviving 5 minutes in a tent without Wi-Fi. At sunrise, I was frying bacon on the camp stove when I heard tires crunching on gravel. I looked up and saw two sheriff's deputies walking in from the road. One older, one young, both with that morning coffee determination in their step. "Morning," I called out, flipping the bacon like it was a Saturday picnic. "Sir, are you the property owner here?" the older deputy asked. "Yes, sir. Lars Godwin. This is my land. Been in the family since the 1880s. We got an anonymous call reporting a suspicious fire in a public conservation zone, the younger one said. Also reports of possible illegal camping and vagrancy. I looked at Brendan, then back at the deputies. Vagrancy? On my own damn land? Do you have proof of ownership, sir? I handed them a laminated property map from my truck, complete with highlighted borders, county stamps, and parcel numbers. Then I opened the app and showed them the camera footage, specifically the moment Karen Reed and her two stooges crept across the perimeter line like they were hunting Bigfoot with clipboards. The older deputy squinted at the video, then chuckled. "That's Reed from Summit Shore, right? Bingo." The younger one flipped through the map. "This lake's not public?" "Never was. Not listed in the Federal Water Access Database. Fully deeded. And those signs along the perimeter don't say optional." They nodded, exchanged glances, and the older one said, "Well, Mr. Godwin, we apologize for the disturbance. Everything looks in order. Enjoy your morning." I offered them some bacon because why not? But they declined with a smile and walked back toward their cruiser. Brendan whistled low as they drove off. "Karen's gonna love that." "Karen's already scheming," I muttered, packing up the map. This was just the first pebble. 2 days later, I drove back down to the lower gate near the lake after a supply run and saw something that made my jaw tighten like a vise. The iron chain that normally dangled loose along the side had been looped across the access road and padlocked shut. But that wasn't the part that got me. Hanging from the chain was a fresh aluminum sign staked into the gravel like it meant business. Temporarily closed, Summit Shore Preserve HOA, water access under review. I stared at it for a solid minute, then slowly reversed the truck and parked. Just off the road. I stepped out, walked to the chain, and scanned the area. No HOA crew in sight. Then I pulled out my phone and started filming. Date, time, GPS coordinates, the whole 9 yards. I circled the sign, narrated what I saw, and zoomed in on the padlock for good measure. That's when I noticed a plastic HOA tag zip-tied to the latch, like this was their equipment now, their trail, their lake, except it wasn't. I called the sheriff's department again, gave them the rundown. The dispatcher sounded irritated just hearing the words Summit Shore Preserve, said they'd make a note, but unless I had been personally blocked or threatened, it was technically a civil matter. If I removed the lock and gate myself, it could go sideways unless I had a court order or documentation showing active harm. I had documentation, all right, but what I needed was leverage. Back at the ranch house, I found something even better waiting in my mailbox. Among the feed catalogs and tax flyers was an envelope stamped with the HOA's gold logo like it was Buckingham Palace correspondence. Inside, a formal invitation to attend a community emergency session in 3 days. Subject, environmental and safety concerns related to unauthorized use of shared waterscape. That's how they worded it. Shared waterscape. There it was. They weren't just trying to shame me, they were laying groundwork to reframe my lake as shared property, never mind the fact that it wasn't legally theirs and never had been. The language was precise, lawyer-crafted. They called it a visually communal amenity, implying that because people could see it from their deck, they had a stake in how it was used. I nearly crushed the letter in my hand. Later that day, I took a drive past Summit Shore's front gate and saw laminated flyers tacked to community bulletin boards and mail posts. Each one was titled, Protecting Our Water, Ensuring Responsible Use of Community-Adjacent Ecosystems. It featured a picture of my pier, zoomed in from a distance, clearly taken during our campout. Beneath it, bulleted claims, unregulated fire activity at the shoreline, overnight occupation without board awareness, potential use of shared aquatic habitat for private commercial gain. Commercial gain? I didn't charge a soul to fish that lake. I barely let my cousins pitch tents out there, and I sure as hell wasn't turning it into a damn glamping retreat. But the insinuation was clear. They wanted neighbors to believe I was monetizing a natural asset they had some vague claim to. I called Brendan that night. They locked your road, he asked, incredulous. Like with a padlock. That's criminal trespass. They call it a precaution. Jesus. You still got that body cam set up from the Forest Service? He laughed. You want a kit? No, I said. I want backup. For the next 2 days, I documented everything. Remeasured the boundary line with GPS. Pulled copies of the plat map, the mineral rights lease, the old 1952 water use statement my grandfather filed that declared the lake a private reservoir for livestock irrigation. I even called up an old acquaintance from the county recorder's office to pull HOA's registered boundary documents. As I expected, their subdivision stopped 300 feet short of my fence line. The lake wasn't on their land, wasn't their responsibility, and wasn't subject to their jurisdiction, but they were pretending it was. And that made it dangerous. The day before the meeting, I printed a map the size of a movie poster with every lot line and parcel number. Then I stapled a screenshot from the video of Karen and her clipboard gang creeping through my trees and added the caption, Unauthorized Entry 11:47 p.m. And just in case, I mounted a new trail cam pointed directly at the gate chain. If they wanted a war over optics, I had gear, and unlike them, I had facts. I pulled up to the Summit Shore Preserve Community Hall just before 6. It was a glass and stone monstrosity meant to resemble some kind of sustainable lodge, but it looked more like a tech startup threw up in the forest. The HOA had clearly spared no expense. Recycled wood beams, touchscreen sign-in kiosk, and an awkwardly modern chandelier made of repurposed bicycle chains. I parked just outside the HOA boundary, wheeled my poster tube over my shoulder, and walked in like I'd been invited to my own trial. Inside, there were already at least 30 people milling around, sipping compostable cups of herbal tea and murmuring with the anxious energy of people expecting a scandal. At the front of the room, there stood Karen Reed, blonde helmet of hair, soft green cardigan, and the smug smile of someone who thought they'd won before the whistle blew. Flanking her were two board members, one of whom I recognized as the same guy who'd scowled at me from the bushes during their little midnight nature walk. Karen raised her hand like a schoolteacher. Thank you everyone for coming. As you know, recent events have raised serious questions about access, safety, and ecological stewardship regarding the lakeside perimeter. It's not your lake, I said loud and clear. Heads turned, murmurs rippled. Karen blinked and then smiled wider like I was an adorable interruption. Mr. Godwin, she cooed. As I said in the letter, this is a community dialogue. Then let's have one. I unrolled the map onto the front table and pinned it down with 2 copies of the county parcel records. This is my property, legally. Surveyed, deeded, recorded. The lake, the dock, the trees. Every inch of it has been in my family since before Colorado became a state. Karen gave a tight smile. Of course, we recognize historical usage, but the visual and environmental impact of your activities is... I cut her off. The impact? You mean camping on my own land? Lighting a regulated fire in a designated fire ring, surrounded by gravel 20 feet from the waterline? While your so-called officers trespassed onto private land in the middle of the night to take unauthorized photos? The man next to her, probably the HOA's VP, spoke up. We received multiple complaints, Mr. Godwin. People were concerned. There was smoke, lights, activity. From half a mile away, I said. Through binoculars, I assume. Karen tried again. The community voted to form a task force to evaluate potential shared use models for the lakefront area. There is no shared use. That lake is not on your land. It never was. And padlocking my road? That's criminal interference. You want to talk about stewardship? Start by learning to read a boundary map. A few voices in the room started murmuring in my favor. A man in the back asked, "Wait, so the lake's not even part of Summit Shore?" Karen's smile faltered. It visually anchors the eastern vista of our development. That carries weight in land use conversations. That carries 0 weight in court, I said. I've already filed a statement with the sheriff. And if I find one more lock, one more fake sign, or one more HOA volunteer on my side of the fence, I'm filing charges. The room went quiet. Karen stared at me, her face tightening in a way that betrayed real panic for the first time. She leaned in slightly. You're being combative, Mr. Godwin. Lady, you brought the fight. I packed up the map, turned, and left without another word. No applause, no outrage. Just silence. And silence was good. Silence meant the spell was breaking. The next morning, I drove down to the lake trail to check the cameras and see if anything had been tampered with. The chain was still hanging there, unlocked now, but the sign had been yanked. Instead, nailed into the fence post was a handwritten note in permanent marker. Enjoy your toxic runoff lake, redneck. Classy. I scanned it, took photos, and uploaded the footage from the previous night. Around 10 p.m., a man in a hoodie had pulled up in a golf cart from Summit Shore, yanked the sign, and nailed the insult. I didn't recognize him, but I saved the plate number and sent it to the sheriff's office with a fresh report. Then, with cameras rolling, I enrolled a fresh new banner across the same fence post, bold white letters on green canvas. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Cameras active. I didn't shout. I didn't swing. I documented. And then I called Brendan. I'm bringing the bolt cutters tomorrow, I said. We're taking that gate back. Brendan rolled up in his green Tacoma just after noon, wearing his old Ranger vest like a uniform. The sun was high, the pines casting sharp shadows across the lower trail, and I was already setting up the GoPro on a fence post when he hopped out with a toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. You sure you want to film this? He asked, unscrewing the cap. I want it on record, I said, checking the drone battery. No swearing, no threats, no theatrics. Just 2 veterans cutting a lock off private property. We hiked the short slope down to the gated trailhead. The padlock was new, not the same one from 2 days ago. Brass, chunky HOA logo engraved on the front. So they weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. Ready? Brendan asked, already lining up the bolt cutters. I nodded. He made one clean snap. The lock popped and fell into the dust. Civil disobedience complete, he muttered. I lifted the chain off the gate, pushed it open, and waved at the drone hovering silently above. Then we walked through, casual as you please, down toward the pier. The lake shimmered ahead like a sheet of polished steel. For half a second, it felt like victory. And then the shouting started. 3 voices behind us. Fast footsteps, crunching gravel. I turned around just in time to see a small crowd barreling toward us down the access path from Summit Shore. Karen in the lead, hair flying, phone in one hand, HOA clipboard in the other. Behind her were 2 of her regular goons, one of them her husband, the other the same guy who tried to take a swing at me back at the meeting. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen barked, breathless. Brendan raised an eyebrow. "Walking." "You've tampered with HOA property. That's felony vandalism." Brendan just blinked. "You locked a gate on someone else's land." I stepped forward, calm and clear. "This is private property. You've seen the maps. You've seen the sheriff's reports. You have no authority here." "That trail services the neighborhood," Karen shrieked. "The community has a right to protect its environmental interest." Before I could answer, her husband stepped forward and shoved the broken lock into my chest. "You think you're tough," he said, crowding me. "Maybe you need a lesson in consequences." I didn't flinch. "Take one more step, and you're going to jail." That's when he reached into the back of his truck, yanked out a flathead shovel, and raised it like he meant to swing. Brendan moved faster than I've seen him in years. In one motion, he pulled the stun baton from his vest, not turned on, just visible, and stepped between us. "Don't," he said. The man hesitated. Then Karen screamed, "You're threatening us." "I'm calling the sheriff." "Do it," I said. "Tell them to bring the same deputy who watched the last drone video, and tell them to bring a property line map." Meanwhile, the drone was catching everything. The footage showed the lock removal, the trespass, the attempted assault. No edits, no voiceover, just truth. Karen fumbled with her phone, muttering something about ecological violations and private militias. I don't think she knew which story she wanted to run with. We stood there like that for nearly 15 minutes until we heard sirens coming up the Ridge Road. 2 sheriff cruisers pulled up near the trailhead. The same older deputy from before stepped out. His hand went to his radio and he gave me that look, the one that says, "You again?" I waved. "Afternoon, deputy. Glad you could make it." Karen ran to him first, of course, arms flailing, shouting about destruction of public assets, threats with weapons, and a possible armed conspiracy. The deputy listened, nodded, then walked over to me. "You got the video?" I handed him the SD card from the drone. "Uncut, start to finish." He took it, turned to the group, and said, "Nobody moves. Let me review this." We waited. 20 minutes. The tension baked under the sun. Karen's husband paced in circles like a caged dog. Brendan leaned on a post and sipped from his thermos like it was a picnic. Finally, the deputy returned. "Well," he said, "this just got real simple." He turned to Karen. "You and your associates were clearly on private property. The signage was visible. The trail you blocked isn't HOA jurisdiction. And your husband," he pointed, "raised a weapon. That's assault." Karen gasped. But he... The deputy handed her a folded paper. "You're receiving a formal citation for obstruction and unauthorized restriction of land access. You'll appear in county court next month. If you fail to show, we'll issue a warrant." Her husband stepped forward to protest, but another officer raised a hand. "Sir, I recommend you don't escalate." Karen turned beet red. Her lip trembled. For the first time, she didn't speak. Just glared at me with a hatred I've only ever seen in combat zones, when the other side realizes you're not bluffing. "Let's go, Brendan," I said. We walked back to the truck, leaving the chain and lock in the deputy's hands. The last thing I heard was Karen yelling, "This isn't over," into the pine breeze. 2 weeks went by without a word. No new locks, no flyers, no Karen sightings through the pines. I almost believed for one foolish second that she'd backed off. Maybe the citation had knocked the wind out of her sails. Maybe the sheriff's video had done what logic never could. But then a certified envelope arrived, hand-delivered by a guy in a suit who didn't say a word before driving off in a Tesla with HOA plates. Inside was a formal civil lawsuit notice filed by Summit Shore Preserve HOA. They were suing me for $85,000. I read the claim line by line. Allegations included intentional degradation of community value, unauthorized use of visually communal landscapes, and, my personal favorite, reckless endangerment of aesthetic harmony. They were actually trying to sue me for camping near my own lake. I laughed at first. I truly did. But the weight of it settled fast. This wasn't a tantrum, this was strategy. They wanted a paper trail, something that could sit in county court records with my name attached, a way to turn a neighbor dispute into a legal club. But I wasn't going to play defense. I called a friend, Elaine Margate, an attorney up in Durango I'd worked with when my father passed, and we'd had to secure the ranch boundaries for probate. Sharp as broken glass and just as unforgiving. I sent her the complaint, then sat on my porch while she read. Her first words were, "They just handed you their throat." She wasn't wrong. We filed a counterclaim for $375,000. Damages included defamation, trespass, false police reporting, interference with the use of private property, and attempted assault, backed by drone footage, police citations, GPS-verified parcel data, and authenticated historical records going back to 1928. And we weren't subtle about it. I made sure the HOA board was properly served on HOA letterhead by an off-duty sheriff. Karen's face, I was told, turned pale as ash. Then came the storm. 2 days after the countersuit was filed, I started getting emails from a new address, legalcompliance@summitshore.org. The first claimed I'd misrepresented the purpose of the water body by failing to register it as a communal amenity. The second accused me of exclusionary use of naturally shared visual resources. The third incredibly argued that by building a pier without community design review, I had violated a covenant of eco-integrity guidelines. All three were unsigned. All three had Karen's style all over them. I didn't respond. Instead, I doubled down. I had Brendan help me install new 4K trail cams on every approach to the lakefront, low to the ground, motion activated, night vision enabled. I contacted a local surveyor to mark every boundary in bold orange paint with steel rods hammered deep. I installed fresh, private property, no trespassing, surveillance in use, signs every 50 feet. I even flew the drone nightly, capturing images of every house facing the lake, documenting, just in case, any instance of spying, lights, or foot traffic. And finally, I mailed a formal cease and desist letter to Summit Shore Preserve HOA, signed and notarized, warning that any future entry onto my land or attempt to obstruct access would be met with legal prosecution and claims for maximum damages. I didn't hear back for a few days. Then a neighbor, one of the quiet ones from the edge of the HOA line, drove up my driveway in a rusted Jeep and handed me something. A copy of a Summit Shore newsletter slipped under his door. Inside was an official update that read, "We are currently facing a legal attack by an adjacent landholder who is actively threatening the preservation of our community's visual harmony. We urge residents to remain strong and unified in the face of hostility." They were rallying their people, but I had something better than a mob. I had evidence, and the courtroom was next. Court hearings in our county aren't like in the movies. There's no grand oak-paneled chamber, no echoing gasps from a crowd, just a dry little courtroom on the third floor of the government building in Alamosa with flickering fluorescent lights and a clerk who always seems one sigh away from quitting. But what was like the movies was Karen showing up with a 3-person entourage, her lawyer, her husband, and a smug guy in a blazer who claimed to be their community standards consultant. She wore a bright green blazer and carried a binder twice, the size of mine. I don't think she expected to see me there in a pressed shirt, flanked by Elaine Margate and a land use expert from the University of Colorado. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, former property litigator. She looked bored before we even started. HOA's side opened with a PowerPoint about view corridors, collective enjoyment of nature, and a supposed ecological agreement that they claimed applied to all bordering properties, even though none of it appeared in my deed nor in any official registry. Elaine let them finish. Then she calmly pulled up a parcel overlay from the Federal Bureau of Land Management, clearly showing my land, the lake, and the fact that Summit Shore Preserve was built 5 years after my grandfather's last boundary update had been recorded. Then came the video. Elaine presented edited clips from my drone footage with timestamps and GPS tags. HOA members walking across my posted property line, Karen photographing my camp without permission, her husband raising a shovel in direct confrontation. The sheriff's incident reports were printed, highlighted, and entered into evidence. Karen looked like she was trying not to choke, but the real nail came from the land use expert. He explained that the lake, shallow, seasonal, and technically without a defined inlet or outlet, was not legally considered a navigable public water body and therefore not subject to any shared use laws in Colorado unless explicitly designated, which it wasn't. Then Elaine handed the judge copies of my property tax records going back 15 years, historical photographs showing my grandfather fishing off the same shoreline in 1947, and perhaps most damning, Karen's own HOA promotional flyer that referred to the lake as a scenic backdrop, not part of HOA management. When the judge recessed for lunch, I caught Karen in the hallway, whispering to her lawyer, visibly pale. Her husband paced. The consultant looked like he was trying to disappear into his phone. After lunch, the judge came back with her ruling, calm, clipped, and devastating. She declared the HOA's original claim baseless, citing no standing jurisdiction, no legal encumbrance, and no credible evidence of harm. She ordered them to pay all legal fees related to their suit and defense. Then she turned to our counterclaim. Elaine stood and requested a formal hearing to determine financial damages for trespass, harassment, and attempted defamation. The judge agreed, setting a full trial date for 3 weeks later and allowing us to subpoena HOA meeting records, emails, and internal communications relevant to the lake incident. Karen tried to object, but the judge silenced her. "You initiated this legal action, Mrs. Reed. If you're unhappy with the process, you should have stayed out of court." We walked out of that building with momentum behind us. Elaine was already drafting the subpoena requests by the time we reached her car. That night, I sat by the fire pit near the lake with a beer in hand, watching the water reflect the stars. The gate was still closed, my camera still rolling, but for the first time in weeks, the silence felt like mine again. The subpoenas landed like grenades. Karen and the HOA board tried to delay, of course, citing privacy, vague claims about member confidentiality, and one hilarious email where Karen claimed her files were accidentally deleted by a system update. Elaine responded by filing a motion to compel compliance, and the judge granted it in under 48 hours. We got everything: meeting minutes, internal emails, memos about visual dominance rights, even a board proposal, authored by Karen herself, suggesting a campaign to pressure adjacent landowners into either selling access or reintegrating their land into the HOA zone through soft administrative pressure. That phrase stuck with me. Soft administrative pressure. One thread in particular made my blood boil. Karen had emailed the HOA's environmental subcommittee 2 months prior, suggesting that if they could document even one instance of unlawful camping, fire usage, or waste at the shoreline, it might be used to push a county action against me. She literally tried to fabricate violations to weaponize environmental law. Another document, buried in a digital folder labeled Archive June Temp, contained a scanned version of a doctored map showing the lake overlapping HOA parcels. The original version, dated 3 months earlier, showed the real boundary. The fake one had been used in their community meeting to justify chaining my access road. Elaine's eyes lit up. "That's fraud," she muttered, almost gleeful. We filed an amended complaint the next morning, now requesting punitive damages and citing intentional misrepresentation, malicious prosecution, and falsification of public claims. Karen's lawyer tried to settle. He called Elaine with a proposal. HOA would drop all actions, pay a token settlement, and issue a private apology. Elaine asked him, "Do you think my client wants an apology?" Then she hung up. Meanwhile, I upgraded my perimeter security. Motion-activated floodlights, wireless alarm sensors on the trail, and I installed a brand new steel gate at the lake access road, this time with biometric keypad entry. Anyone without my fingerprint or my authorization code wasn't getting through. Period. That same weekend, a truck with a landscaping trailer was caught on one of my cams attempting to reverse down my access trail. No logo, no markings. When the driver saw the locked gate and cameras, he just sat there for 5 minutes, then left. I sent the footage to Elaine. She sent it to the judge. The trial date approached like a slow-moving storm, and you could feel the tension in the air. HOA board members started avoiding me in town. Karen stopped showing up at their usual meetings. One neighbor said she was working remotely from her mountain house. Her husband put their place up for sale off-market, which told me they were panicking. I kept fishing, kept the camp ready, built a small pier extension with solar lights and a bench, invited a couple of veterans I served with to visit for the weekend. Just regular guys with boots and memories, throwing lines and sharing beers. We didn't talk about the HOA. We didn't need to. They'd already lost the lake. They just didn't know it yet. The trial opened on a Tuesday morning with a packed gallery, not because anyone cared about HOA politics, but because word had spread that this was going to be a reckoning. Locals knew me. Some had worked on my land, hunted the outskirts, or brought their kids to fish the lake's edge back in the day. Others had long disliked the HOA's new money arrogance. The courtroom didn't take sides until Karen walked in. She wore gray this time, hair tied back, lips pursed like she was bracing for dental surgery. Her husband sat stiff beside her, and the consultant from before didn't even bother to show. Their new attorney looked half her age and twice as nervous. Elaine started with the drone video again. The judge had already seen it, but this time the jury did too. Crystal clear aerial footage of Karen and others marching past a private property no trespassing sign, taking photos, chaining the gate, and arguing with me. The moment her husband raised the shovel drew a few audible gasps from the jury box. Then came the emails. One by one, Elaine walked the jury through HOA board communications, Karen's original suggestion to target me, the request for dirt on my usage of the lake, the manipulated map. Every slide, every document, time to hit harder than the last. Karen tried to hide her discomfort, but when the forged map came up, highlighted against the original, her head dropped. Elaine's voice never rose. She just kept going, methodical and relentless. When it was our turn to testify, I stood, told my story simply, that I'd camped on my own land, on the same spot my father and grandfather had fished before me, that I never once charged anyone to use the lake, never violated fire restrictions, and never asked anyone to leave unless they crossed the boundary. The jury listened, and when Elaine showed them the county survey overlays and federal registry entries confirming my ownership and exclusion from any HOA charter, several heads nodded. Then it was Karen's turn. She didn't do well. Cross-examination revealed inconsistencies. She claimed she believed the lake was shared, but couldn't explain why HOA newsletters had referred to it as a scenic backdrop and not an amenity. She denied seeing the private property sign, but was shown a photo of her standing right next to it. Elaine, smiling politely, asked her, "Do you routinely ignore legal signage when it's inconvenient, or only when it involves lakes?" The courtroom laughed. The judge didn't object. By day 3, it was over. The jury came back in just under 2 hours. Their verdict? Full dismissal of all claims by the HOA, for $10,000 in compensatory and punitive damages awarded to me. Formal censure of Summit Shore Preserve HOA for coordinated harassment and abuse of process. Karen didn't look at me as the verdict was. Read. Her husband stood frozen, like his spine had locked in place. The judge thanked the jury, banged her gavel, and that was that. But as I walked out of that courtroom into the sunlight, something else happened. A man I didn't recognize, mid-60s, wide-brimmed hat, stopped me by the steps. Said he used to work for the county assessor's office. "Your granddad was a good man," he told me. "Glad to see someone still got some spine out here." I nodded, shook his hand, and kept walking. It was time to build something new. 3 days after the verdict, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. Not one of those clean, glossy HOA-approved ones either. This was a janky metal frame with a crooked banner that read, "Private listing, price reduced." I don't know if she hoped to quietly vanish or if the HOA had turned on her, but it was clear she was leaving. But I wasn't done. With the settlement money on the way, I hired 2 contractors, one to level the old dirt pull-in near the lake and pour a proper stone pad. The other, a friend of mine from the Army who now worked in timber framing, helped me raise a one-room wooden cabin just 10 yards from the shoreline. Nothing fancy. No plumbing, just a stove, 4 bunks, a screen porch, and a flagpole out front. I called it the Coyote Camp. I ran wiring from my solar array and set up trail cameras with license plate readers at the only 2 trail entries still bordering HOA land. Not because I was paranoid, because I was practical. One visit from a sore loser could undo a lot of work. Meanwhile, Elaine sent me a box full of legal documents, court orders, rulings, and, most importantly, a certified copy of the judgment barring the HOA from any future claim to or governance over my lakefront access point. A permanent injunction. The next HOA meeting was quiet, from what I heard. No agenda items related to ecological corridors or communal view sheds. No speeches about access equity. And no Karen. Some of the residents started driving around the neighborhood to avoid passing my gate. I saw one guy in a golf cart pull a full U-turn after spotting my new private access, no HOA entry, trespassers will be prosecuted sign. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. But the best part was what came next. I reached out to a veterans nonprofit I'd worked with years ago. Told them I had a new idea, seasonal weekend retreats, fishing, campfires, and a little bit of nothing for guys who needed it most. No fees, no publicity, just a phone call and a handshake. 2 weeks later, 4 vets showed up. One brought his teenage son. They pitched tents, grilled meat, and fished until dusk. One of them looked at the cabin and said, "You built this just for us." I told him, "I built it for anyone who's earned a quiet night without someone telling them where they can or can't be." That evening, we lit a fire in the pit, passed a bottle, and listened to the coyotes sing. I caught a glimpse of a drone blinking red up above, someone from the HOA, trying to see what we were doing, no doubt. But I'd already registered the airspace for recreational restriction. I smiled, waved straight at it, and it zipped off like a guilty bug. That weekend, I didn't hear from Karen, didn't see a single board member, just the wind in the pines and the occasional splash of a fish jumping at twilight. This land had always been mine. Now no one could question it. Summer rolled into fall. The trees around the lake turned golden and crimson, and mist hung low over the water in the early mornings. It was the kind of silence that felt earned, not just peaceful, but deserved. I'd fought for it, and I'd won. The check from the HOA arrived via courier. $410,000, certified, with a separate letter from their attorney requesting no further public statements. Elaine framed the letter, not to hang, just for the joke. Karen's house finally sold, at a loss, according to public records. Her husband transferred the deed to a shell company before the closing, but we still traced it. I didn't care who bought it. Whoever they weren't getting near my lake. A few weeks later, I got a call from the sheriff. He let me know, with a dry chuckle, that Karen had been formally indicted on charges of filing a false police report, falsifying legal maps, and obstruction of justice. Apparently, forging municipal documents and harassing non-members didn't sit well with the district attorney, especially after all the publicity. She turned herself in and was released on bail, but sentencing was expected before the year was out. She won't be running any more HOA meetings. As for the Summit Shore Preserve Board, they issued an amended charter stating that the HOA holds no authority, implied or actual, over adjacent non-member properties. A copy of that amendment now hangs inside the cabin, next to the fish chart, the yay first patch of military unit stickers, and a laminated photo of the old family deed from 1889. On Veterans Day, we hosted a small gathering, 12 of us this time, some with wives or sons. No press, no officials, just coffee, venison, and a fire crackling near the lake. Someone asked me if I'd ever considered opening the land for public use. I shook my head. "This land's not public," I said. "It's personal." That's the difference. Late that night, I stood by the lake alone. The stars looked close enough to grab. The water was still, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to defend it. I just got to enjoy it. A carved sign now sits at the start of the trail down to the cabin. It reads, "Coyote Camp, Veterans Only, Private Lake. Respect the land, or turn around." I don't expect Karen to ever see it, but if she does, maybe she'll finally understand something she never could. Some things aren't hers to manage. Some boundaries aren't just legal. They're earned, lived, and fought for. And now, they're protected.